On my birthday, my parents gave me $100. Here, your grandfather sent this. 1 month later, my grandfather came to visit me. Did the $20,000 I sent you help? I replied, I only received $100. Then, my grandfather slammed the table and started to yell. My name is Adrian, and I've always been the least loved child in my family. This isn't something I'm making up or exaggerating for pity. It's a fact. My parents, Alberto and Sandra, have always had a favorite, my brother, Mauricio. Ever since we were little, Mauricio was the center of attention. If there was money for a new toy, it was for him. If there was an opportunity to go to a summer camp or to take classes for something like soccer or music, Mauricio was the chosen one. I, on the other hand, always got the leftovers, used clothes, broken toys, or simply a dismissive, you don't need that, Adrian. It's not that I was dying for material things, but it hurts to grow up knowing that to your own parents, you are not the priority. When I turned 25, my life was not exactly a dream. My parents had lost their jobs a couple of years ago, and since then, the family depended completely on my grandfather, Antonio. He lives in another country, and although he retired long ago, he has a generous pension and savings that seem endless. Thanks to him, the house where we live, a modest but decent house in a middle-class neighborhood, was still standing. He paid the bills for electricity, water, internet, everything. He even sent extra money so that my parents and Mauricio wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I, on the other hand, worked in a shopping mall at a clothing store. My salary barely covered my basic needs, food, some decent clothes, and an occasional outing with friends. I'm not complaining because at least I could support myself, but it was not a life of luxury. Mauricio, on the other hand, didn't work, he never had. He claimed he was finding his passion, or some nonsense like that, and my parents supported him as if he were a misunderstood genius. My grandfather Antonio was always different with me. Although I didn't see him much, I always felt that he truly loved me. He would write me letters, send me messages, and sometimes even send a small gift, like a book or a jersey from his favorite soccer team. He said I reminded him of himself when he was young, that I had grit and that I didn't give up. That made me feel good because at home, no one else seemed to notice. The day of my 25th birthday was a day I will never forget, but not for the reasons one would expect from a birthday. My parents had never been enthusiastic about celebrating my birthdays. When I was a kid, sometimes there wasn't even a cake, and if there was, it was something small they bought at the last minute from the supermarket. Mauricio, in contrast, always had huge parties with piñatas, expensive gifts, and even clowns when we were little. That day, however, I was surprised when I saw that my mother, Sandra, had bought a cake. It wasn't much. A small cake, the kind they sell at the supermarket for a few dollars, with half-melted frosting and an artificial vanilla smell you could notice from a mile away. But to me, it was something. I thought, well, at least this year, they remembered. That night, after an exhausting day at the store, I came home to find my parents and Mauricio in the living room. The table was set with the cake, and there was a candle with the number 25 stuck in the center. They looked at me with faces that seemed more of obligation than of joy. Mauricio was sitting on the sofa, looking at his phone as if being there was a waste of time. My father, Alberto, was the first to speak. "Happy birthday, Adrian," he said without much enthusiasm as he cut a slice of cake and put it on a plastic plate. "Here is your gift." He handed me a small envelope. I opened it, expecting to find a card or something symbolic, but inside was a $100 bill. I'm not one to focus on money, but it seemed strange. My mother, Sandra, quickly added, "Your grandfather Antonio sent this for you. He told us to give it to you on his behalf." I stared at the bill, a bit confused, but I didn't want to make a scene. After all, it was a gift, and it came from my grandfather, whom I loved very much. I smiled and said, "Thank you. Please tell my grandfather I appreciate it very much." My parents nodded, and Mauricio let out a little laugh from the sofa as if something amused him. Then they sang the most listless, happy birthday, I have ever heard in my life. It was as if they were completing a formality, as if someone had forced them to be there. We finished the cake in silence, and everyone went to their rooms. There was no more celebration, no laughter, nothing that resembled a happy family, but I didn't care too much. I was used to it. What did strike me as strange was what happened in the following weeks. Suddenly, my parents and Mauricio started behaving differently. One day I came home and saw my mother with a bag full of new clothes, blouses, pants, shoes, all from expensive brands. Mauricio also had new clothes, a latest model phone, and even a pair of wireless headphones that cost a fortune. My father, who always complained about not having money, was suddenly planning a trip to the beach with the two of them. I wasn't invited, of course. When I asked them where they had gotten so much money, my mother replied with an evasive smile. Your grandfather sent us a little extra money. Don't worry, Adrian, you have your job. I didn't give it much thought. I figured my grandfather had indeed sent them something, as always, but something inside me wasn't at ease. There was something strange in their attitudes, in the way they avoided looking me in the eye when they talked about the money. However, I decided not to think too much about it. My life continued as usual. I worked from Monday to Sunday at the shopping mall, dealing with rude customers and saving every penny for my own things. Meanwhile, Mauricio continued to not work, living like a king thanks to my grandfather's money, and my parents never stopped spoiling him. They went on vacation and kept buying expensive things for themselves. A month after my birthday, I received a message that made my day. It was my grandfather Antonio, saying he was coming to visit us. I was excited. I hadn't seen him in several months, and he had always been my favorite person in the family. He told me he wanted to take us all out to lunch at the best restaurant in the city, an elegant place I had never been to. The idea of spending time with him filled me with joy, even though I knew sharing a table with my parents and Mauricio wouldn't be exactly fun. The day of the lunch arrived, and I put on my best clothes, a decent pair of jeans and a shirt I had bought on sale. When we arrived at the restaurant, my parents and Mauricio were dressed as if they were going to a gala. My mother wore a new dress, my father a suit I had never seen on him, and Mauricio had shoes that shone brighter than the marble floor of the place. I, in contrast, seemed out of place, but I didn't care. I was there for my grandfather. Antonio greeted us with a huge smile. He looked the same as always, tall, with his white hair neatly combed and an energy that made everyone in the place notice him. He hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "You've become a real man, Adrian. I'm proud of you." Those words went straight to my heart. No one in my family had said anything like that to me in a long time. We sat at the table, and the lunch started well. The food was incredible: steaks, pastas, desserts that looked like works of art. But as always, my parents and Mauricio couldn't pass up the opportunity to make me feel small. While we were eating, Mauricio started with his sarcastic comments. "Another year, Adrian. And you're still at that mediocre job in the mall," he said with a mocking smile. "Don't you get tired of folding clothes all day?" My mother let out a giggle, and my father added, "Let's see if you mature a bit this year, Adrian. Mauricio is at least finding his path." I wanted to respond, but I swallowed my words. I didn't want to ruin the evening. My grandfather, who had been quiet until that moment, looked at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. We continued eating, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. We talked about my grandfather's travels, his stories from when he worked, and how he was doing in his country. Everything seemed to be going well until suddenly, Antonio looked at me and said, "Hey, Adrian, did the $20,000 I sent for your birthday help you out?" The fork fell from my hand. I looked at my grandfather, confused, and replied, "What $20,000? I only received $100. The restaurant fell silent, or at least that's how it felt. My parents looked at each other, their faces turning pale. Mauricio, who was taking a sip of water, almost choked. My grandfather frowned and repeated in a more serious tone, $100. I sent you $20,000 with your parents. I told them to give it to you as a birthday present. My parents quickly tried to change the subject. My mother said something about how expensive the restaurant was, and my father started talking about the weather, but my grandfather was not about to let it go. "What is going on here?" he asked in a voice that made everyone at the table freeze. I swallowed hard and said, as calmly as I could, "My parents gave me a birthday cake and $100. They said it came from you." Antonio turned to look at my parents, and his eyes were like daggers. The atmosphere became so tense you could feel it in the air. My mother tried to speak, but my grandfather cut her off. "Where is the other $19,900 I sent for my grandson?" he asked, his voice trembling with rage. "I gave it to you so you could surprise him, and he received nothing." My parents started to stammer. My father said something about a mistake and that perhaps they had been confused. My mother tried to blame the bank, saying that maybe the money hadn't arrived in full, but their excuses were so poor that even I, who didn't want to believe the worst, realized something was very wrong. Then, my grandfather slammed his fist on the table, making the plates tremble. "Explain to me right now what you did with the money," he shouted. The entire restaurant went quiet. The waiters looked at us, and diners at neighboring tables turned their heads. My parents had no escape. Finally, my mother, her voice trembling, confessed, We used it for a few things. Clothes, a trip, things for Mauricio." I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents had kept $19,900 that my grandfather had sent for me and had spent it on themselves and Mauricio. I looked at my brother, who had his head down, avoiding my eyes. My grandfather, red with rage, stood up from his chair. "I can't believe you are so miserable," he said, his voice cutting like a knife. "You know what? You will not see a single cent from me from now on." My parents started to plead, saying they were sorry, that they wouldn't do it again, that it was a mistake. Mauricio also tried to say something, but my grandfather silenced him with a glare. Then, Antonio looked at me and said, "Adrian, let's go." Without another word and without leaving any money on the table to pay for the dinner, he walked out of the restaurant, leaving my parents with the bill. I followed him, still in shock. My parents and Mauricio were left there with looks of panic on their faces. When we got into my grandfather's car, he looked at me and said, "Adrian, I'm sorry. I didn't know your parents were capable of this, but now that I do, I'm going to make things right." And then he told me everything. "Adrian, you don't know how sorry I am," he said, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I trusted your parents. I thought they were honest, that they loved you enough to give you what you deserve. But I was wrong." I looked at him, still stunned. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to defend my parents because, despite everything, they were my family. But another part, the one that had endured years of contempt and favoritism, was fed up. Finally, I managed to speak. "Grandpa, why didn't you send it to me directly? Why did you give it to them?" Antonio sighed and parked the car on a quiet street, near a park where the streetlights barely illuminated the trees. He turned off the engine and turned to face me. "Because I wanted it to be a surprise, Adrian. I wanted them to give it to you, for them to see how much I love you. I thought it would be a special moment for everyone, that they would be proud of you. But now I see they're not. And this isn't the first time they've done something like this." Those last words hit me like a bucket of cold water. Not the first time. My head started to spin. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. My grandfather looked at me with a mixture of sadness and anger. "For years, Adrian, I have been sending them money for you. Not just for the house bills, not just to support them and Mauricio. I sent money specifically for you for your studies, so you could have some savings, so you could get ahead. But every time I asked how you were, they told me you were fine, that they had given you the money, that everything was in order. And I, like a fool, believed them. I felt a knot in my stomach. All this time, my parents had made me believe that my grandfather barely remembered me, that the $100 for my birthday was a rarity, an isolated gesture. But now it turned out that he had been sending me money, a lot of money, for years, and they had kept it. Everything suddenly clicked into place. Mauricio's new clothes, the trips my parents took, the expensive gifts that always appeared at home while I barely had enough to buy a pair of shoes. All that money was mine, or at least it was meant for me. Grandpa, I don't know what to say, I murmured, feeling the anger begin to grow inside me. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want to get you into trouble with your parents, Antonio replied, running a hand through his white hair. I thought if I told you, it would cause a conflict in the family. I wanted them to be the ones to support you, to act like real parents. But now I see they are just freeloaders. And not only that, Adrian, he continued, it pains me to say it, but I've seen how they treat you, how they belittle you, how they always dote on Mauricio as if he were a king, while they treat you as if you're worthless. Those words were like a punch because it was true. I had always felt it, but hearing someone else say it, and my grandfather no less, made it real. It hurt, but at the same time, it made me feel like I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined it. So, what do I do now? I asked, feeling lost. Antonio smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a smile of determination, as if he had already made a decision. Now, Adrian, we are going to do things right. I'm not going to let those three keep hurting you. And don't worry about the money they stole from you. We'll sort that out. But first, I want to make you a proposal. I looked at him, intrigued. My grandfather had always been a man of action, someone who didn't just stick to words. I knew that what was coming was going to be important. I'm going to give you a good position in one of my companies, he said, with a salary that will let you live well, not just survive. And I also have a small but comfortable apartment. It's yours if you want it. You can start from scratch, away from your parents and Mauricio. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It was too much to process. A new job, a better salary, a place of my own, and above all, the chance to get away from the house where I had felt invisible my whole life. But I also felt afraid. What if I wasn't up to it? What if I couldn't handle the job? My grandfather seemed to read my mind because he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You don't have to decide right now, but I want you to know that I believe in you. I always have. You're my favorite grandson, Adrian, even though I shouldn't say it. You have more strength than you think, and you don't deserve to live in the shadow of those three." Those words broke me, but not from sadness. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, someone truly saw me. I nodded, with tears in my eyes, and said, "Okay, Grandpa. I accept." He smiled, this time for real, and started the car. Good. We'll start arranging everything tomorrow. That same week, my grandfather arranged everything for me. He gave me the job and the apartment he had mentioned. I went to my parents' house to pick up my things. I packed my bags, my books, my computer, but just as I was about to walk out the door, my mother was the first to speak, using that syrupy tone she used when she wanted to manipulate someone. "Adrian, don't be like this. We're your family. Are you really going to leave us all alone? You know things are tough." My father nodded, crossing his arms. "Your grandfather is exaggerating. The money thing was a misunderstanding. You shouldn't leave over a whim." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, feeling the rage rise in my throat. "You kept $19,900 that was mine. You used it to buy things for Mauricio and to go on a trip. That's a misunderstanding." Mauricio looked up from his phone with a mocking smile. "Don't be so dramatic, Adrian. What do you need so much money for? You're still the same loser you've always been." That was the last straw. For the first time in my life, I didn't stay silent. Loser? I said, staring him down. The only loser here is the one who hasn't worked a single day in his life and lives off what Grandpa gives him. But guess what, Mauricio? That's over. Grandpa isn't giving you another cent. Let's see how you manage now. My parents looked at each other, pale. My mother tried to approach me with tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of fear. Adrian, please, don't do this. We're your family. If you leave, what are we going to do? Your grandfather cut us off completely. I felt no pity. For the first time, I felt nothing for them. I just wanted to leave. Ask Mauricio for help, I said, turning away. He's the favorite, right? Let him get you out of this hole. I walked out of the house without looking back. When I closed the door, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. A few days later, my grandfather told me he had received a call from my mother, begging him to give them another chance. But Antonio was firm. He told them he would not help them again until they proved they could change, and that even then, he didn't trust them. He also told me he had heard rumors that my parents and Mauricio were in serious financial trouble. The house where we lived was about to be foreclosed on, and Mauricio was still not working, depending on favors from friends to survive. I'm not going to lie, a part of me felt pity, but another, larger part felt that justice was being served. They had chosen to treat me as if I was worthless. They had chosen to steal from me, and now they were facing the consequences. Today, I am very happy with my job and with my only family, which is my grandfather. I talk to him often, but I have cut all contact with my parents and my brother, and right now, I feel free. Subscribe for more daily stories. M.